Super exciting. We are here today to talk about biological design and architecture. And I'm Céline Vadam. I'm the co-founder of the hospitality think tank and the founder of We Think, a consulting company working on wellness concepts and experiences for the hospitality and tourism industry. And I'm here with my fellow think tank members. So if you guys can introduce yourselves. Willem, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah, so Willem van Polderen, one of the founding partners of Studio Puisto Architects. We're based in Helsinki, Finland, specializing in hospitality, so hotels, resorts, retreats, spas, etc. Yeah, so this sounds like a suitable topic to discuss now.
Well, Sameric.
You want to go next, Sameric, or shall I?
Go ahead, Maria Pia. Lady
Okay.
first.
Okay, very good. Thank you. My name is Maria Pia Intini. I am based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Until recently, I was Development and Investment Director Europe for Citizen and Hotels, which is a vertical player investing, developing, and operating their own hotels across the world. I am now a hospitality real estate investment advisor, and the topic of construction of alternative design is very dear to me, also due to the fact that Susan and I used to work to put a strong emphasis on the topic, and so very curious to hear from Mark and the rest of the hospitality think tank members, inputs and stimuli about the topic.
Okay, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Eric, and I'm with Studio Puisto Architects. My role is hospitality, Global Director of Hospitality Development. So I bring sort of a career of long career in hospitality. I've worked in hotels my entire working career, and finally around the world on 4 continents, and finally returned to Finland a little bit over 4 years ago. And I was very glad to run into the Studio Puisto guys, and we have a lot of things in common in terms of mindset, where we want to see hospitality going. They are designing, and I'm trying to also link the dots of finding the right operators for things, and also providing input of where I see hospitality is going. So, and gladly had met Celine a few years ago, and part of the hospitality think tank, which is the #1 think tank for future of hospitality.
Great. And we have a guest today. We have Mark, who is specializing in sacred geometric design. And I will let you present yourself. You will do a much better job.
Thanks, Celine. Hi, everyone. So I worked in interior architecture and hospitality, residential design, in retail and residential for about 25 years. I worked in London and in Sydney in boutique hotels, large developments, individual houses, and a lot of restaurants and hotels. And about 15 years ago, I had a large life shift as a result of energetic practices that I was undertaking, and decided that I realized that I wanted to be able to integrate the philosophical aspects of working with wellness at a deeper level, and I sought out teachings and practices, and I spent the last 12 or 13 years searching those out. And I've now completed professional training in a 4,000-year-old tradition, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on, and also discovered ways to integrate that with modern technology, which allows me to measure and photograph the human biofield, and also the energetic quality of spaces. So essentially, I'm able to work with geometry and form and materials, and what would be understood as the more subtle energetics of the body. So if you've ever had acupuncture, where the acupuncture needle is placed in the meridians, my work works in a similar way to really bring alive the vitality of a landscape place or a building, and really to imbue it with life at a level to enhance the wellness of the building and the architecture, and hence the people, whether that be through sleep or in the daytime work, but also the real work is really to link that space, that architecture, to its landscape and to a more macrocosmic set of information that comes from the planets and essentially the ecosystem of the Earth. I can go into more later. Some of these elements are related to sacred geometry, which is form and shape, and really it's the very deep roots of architecture in Europe. So my tradition is from Europe. There are many traditions around the world that have worked with similar concepts and principles and practices, and I'll go into it more later today. So that's I guess a good overview of the methodology, and I integrate that work into projects, whether they're hotels and developments, but also individual houses and also landscapes as well. All types of work can be integrated with this practice and my process.
And do you work in the beginning of the project, or is it something that once a master plan is coming to the table to kind of think of it in the big picture? Is it more on a kind of a interior level or exterior spaces level, or throughout the whole design process anyway?
It can be throughout. So for example, the project that Celine is aware of in the Azores, we're involved in a master planning stage at the moment. So first of all, looking at the landscape, looking at the location of where things can be located in relationship to the energetics of the site. So in terms of where would best be located to locate a building as opposed to another place, because there are particular qualities of frequencies that are generated by the topology, by the geology, by other conditions that can be detrimental or beneficial to life. So I can work with master planning of a site. Also, then if there is later stages, we can come in and look at geometry at a more interior scale as well. All scales are possible, but I do like to come in earlier on to understand the site, and then to work through the project, because the methodology can be applied at all scales.
I remember in one of our conversation, Mark, you were mentioning that the bedrooms, for example, they can be positioned in specific areas to enhance people's sleep based on the type of energy there is in this particular area of the building or of the site.
That's correct. So there's been a very large area of study. It's known as geopathic stress. So essentially, the Earth can generate particular fields of energy that can be detrimental to life. These can occur from things like radon gas. They can occur from the energetic fields caused by water or fault lines. And probably more familiar is electromagnetic stress, or electromagnetic fields come from power lines, Wi-Fi fields, that sort of thing. So we have different ways to be able to mitigate those things so that we're not creating undue effect into in terms of sleep spaces in particular. We in terms of the basic principles, making sure that we have blockout, so we have full night, full darkness for sleep, those sort of practicalities. And I take it the next step further to be able to look at the conditions. So for example, if you place a bed in a location and there are particular crossings of these sources of stress that are generated by the Earth, what happens then is they can create vortexes, and in those places you can then have disturbed sleep. But then, for hotels, it's short term, but really what was discovered in the 1950s in Europe is that long-term positioning of beds over these detrimental locations can cause detriment to health, and also can then accelerate the body's diseases, because what happens is the bodies are weakened. Yeah, so these are very well known in Germany and in France. A lot of the studies, not all countries are aware of this, but yeah, those so for example, building biology is now becoming much more well known. The building biology looks at the impact of these spaces, but also then looks at other things to do with the more physical aspects of the building in terms of air, lighting, and air, and these things. Its impact of space. It really comes down to, with location, we're thinking about the impact of the Earth on a space. Essentially, all ancient traditions built with an understanding that there were good places and bad places. And also the amount of energy as well. So, for example, traditionally, if there was a place with a very high, essentially very high energetic component, it would then be too stressful for life. These were places that were then selected for places where there might be the transformation consciousness, connection to the divine, for birthing, these sort of places, but they're too high powered for life. And then we'll look for places that were more neutral, and equally look for places that weren't detrimental, to avoid the places that could cause harm over time.
From my experience in Asia, there's always an important rule that your place of sleep should never be on top of any water flow. And I think that may have something to do with what you were talking about.
This is exactly right, yes. Water flow, but in particular where there are crossings of water. Okay. A water flow, absolutely, because there's a continual movement and there's a very weak electromagnetic field created by the water. It's constant. What happens then? It just drains the body, so the energetic body can then get drained by it. The main condition is where one or more, well, at least two or more of these cross, then becomes a spiral. When there's a spiral, the geometry then accentuates the electrical component, which can then basically get into the body, and then over time it can then drain the vitality of the glands, which can then lead on to a worsening of health.
Interesting.
How do you measure that beforehand? Is it something that you pick up, or do you use a device or other ways to kind of measure? Because of course magnetic activity can be measured, the flow of water to some extent as well, but I think some of the other parts you touched on might be harder to measure.
Correct. So magnetic field, you can use a magnometer. You can measure the magnetic field. Where there's a magnetic field, you have an equally strong electric field. And so if it's a magnetic field from the Earth, that can be beneficial to us, especially when we're in the sunlight and we're earthing and grounding. That's great. But if there's a strong magnetic field and underneath the building, there's an equally strong electric field, and that can then cause problems, especially then we have water and we have then technological fields as well. They combine. To measure the fields that I've been talking about, which come from the components of water. So, for example, where there's water crossing, the water what's the impact of the water is not necessarily the electric field, but it's also the energetic component, the subtle field, in terms of what the energetics that move, for example, in the meridians. In the Chinese system is called qi, and in the Indian system is called prana. These subtle fields also exist in the environment as well, and so these can then be so these subtle components of the body can be affected by the flows and crossings of water. To measure them, I use the traditional methodology, which is called dowsing, or in the French it's called radiesthesia. And these are rods and pendulums and tools which really accentuate the body's ability to do that. The most accurate way is using the body, and those tools, whether they would have been rods or sticks, basically allow us to see what the body can feel, because the body is the most sensitive tool. It's just over millennia, it's atrophied, especially it's atrophied in modern times because of technology. So the body is the best way, and we can then build up maps of those lines and survey those conditions, and then go, and then allows us then to know where to place specific things. For example, where the bed should go. Even moving a bed 2 feet left or right can then create a remarkable difference in the quality of sleep.
Is it something that you can also see in the flora and the fauna? Because you would say if people are sensitive to it, so would be our fellow inhabitants on the planet.
Not really. The plants are not affected in the same way that humans are. No. You can see it sometimes in fleeting conditions. The lines can be seen at certain times of the day, but generally no. The plants don't get affected in the same way do. Animals are also different. For example, like cows will you can use the animals to find out where they are sometimes. So if you're in the landscape and you see cows are always going to they always like the spots that are good for us. But if you see, for example, a mound for termites or ants, they're always on bad crossings. They're always on bad places. And then if you have a cat, the cat's like really strong energies from the earth. So the problem there is you don't know if it's good or bad. And the belief is the fur can transmute it. So they just want really strong energy. So yeah, so if you've got a cat,
so the hairy guys are not affected.
No. And so the cats all, cats like their favorite places. They're plugging into the energies to charge, to charge up. So if it's on your bed, then you have to test to find out whether it's good or bad.
What about dogs? Because my dog, like Maria Pia, saw it when she came to visit me. She has her favorite places, and depending on the time of the day, on the weather, I don't know what other factors she's using to select the spot for the moment. But yeah, she has different favorite places to lay down. So are dogs affected as well?
Yeah, they are. I think the dogs prefer a bit more like the cows. They prefer the nice spots. It's just but cats really like the strong energies. If you've ever seen images of the sort of the saints in India, they will sit on a throne and they'll sit on a tiger skin, and that represents their sainthood, their ability, but also it's acting as an insulator as well. It's actually a piece of technology, so that their life force is not drained into the earth. Yeah, so it's a very, very old understanding.
Just a question, because of course sometimes buildings are on the bad spot, or there's a flow of water under. Because of course we like to live close to water as well, because it's a source of life for the garden, for humans. So are there ways to mitigate according to these principles, like not put the whole building on a cat skin, but maybe other ways to, like Cates of Faraday, or like, I don't know, like Faraday, sorry, like something like this.
Yeah, so for different sorts of lines, so for example the information given off from water, or from, so there's one, the fault line. So a fault line where the earth meets, so the fault line can give off particular energy quality. Also from certain sorts of stones, so shales and limestones, you can get radon gas. So all of these are all part of geopathic stress. One of the ways to mitigate it is to actually do acupuncture directly on the land, so that you can actually put posts in the ground that will then mitigate them. There are other ways as well. I'll show you here.
Hi, Sheila.
This is hello, Sheila.
Hi. Apologies for being late.
No problem. We're just talking about earth energy lines and how to mitigate them. So this is a scallop shell, and this is a piece of knowledge that comes from my tradition, which is about 4,000 years old in Europe. And this is also the symbol of the Compostela, the Santiago the route of the pilgrims. And this is a way. So this is essentially, this would be very ancient biomimetics or biomimicry. This actually is this, when placed on a line that has too much energy and could disrupt sleep. And I do this sometimes in residences, because it's a soft solution. You place the if there's a line here, you place the shell aligned up with the line of the energy, and what happens is the lines of the shell can converge on this point. So it's a waveguide, and then what happens is the impact the line is reduced because the shell pulls it down. So nature gives a solution. So this is really a really elegant way of doing it, and it's softer than putting a post into the ground, which can be a problem. We have so there's different ways of doing it, but yeah, this is a really elegant solution for smaller places. For larger places, we do have to do this because of the nature of the living systems. The energies do change, so it does need checking, because even, let's say you have your property, and let's say then there is some building work several miles away. The impact of the vibrations can impact through the earth and then can change the quality. So it's something that's not static, it can change over time.
You mentioned like bigger projects, so I can see how easier it can be to implement those principles in a like small, like individual property or small boutique hotel, and also easier to implement in like resort locations rather than in the city center. But how can you, is it applicable as well? And how can you apply this principle to city hotels and to large hotels? And like if you have a 300 room hotels, like what do you do? And do you check every single room to, especially in the hospitality industry where a lot of things are still standardized, and you have, your mock-up room, and that will be the same in every single room of the hotel. Or how do you still like use like the best as you could these principles to benefit everybody, the guests, the employees, the land, in different environments?
Yeah, one of the principles is that if I map the energetics on the land, the energetics will keep going up. So if you have a coherent floor plan of your rooms, and the rooms are stacked, then a problematic crossing in one floor will appear in the next. They will go up. So if we impact at the ground level, it will impact all levels. That's one thing. So we don't have to do each level. There's also, in terms of impacting the earth directly, but also I have a system of geometry that allows me to create counteractive waveforms through geometry, and this can be built in different ways. If I'm beginning the work, I can then work with the architect and the structural engineer to design these into the footing plan of the building. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm applying waveforms or harmonics which are generated by the land, which then are built into the structural grid, which then impact all of the building. So essentially the foundation of my work, and that has been the principle for millennia, is to build structures that are in harmony with the landscape. But also, and that there was the geometry and the forms came from the relationship between the land and the planets. The planets would move around, would seem to revolve around a location, and this information was mapped. So in the same way that we create a horoscope for a person, which is a relationship between that person's exact moment of birth and their place of birth, and the geometric relationships between the planets, the way of my tradition was to be able to map those positions for a location on Earth, and angles were created and this information was relayed into geometric forms, and then when laid out on the ground in particular ways, these and the right proportions, what resulted was a harmony was created, which would impact the landscape, and then essentially bring a higher vitality to the space. It would also then impact some of the energy lines as well. So basically, we're working with these geometries to create architecture by infusing them with these energies. In the same way, for example, if you go to an acupuncturist and you are unhealthy, the acupuncturist will choose particular points to unblock the flow to create vitality in the system. But then if they're a traditional Chinese herbalist, for example, they will then give you some herbs that normally taste horrible afterward to go home with, to then continue the balancing process of the system. And those herbs would be designed to fortify the different parts of the system. And so what's happening there is the healing qualities of the herbs are imparted by their vibrational qualities, their vibrational blueprints. You know, each herb has a different quality in the same way. Each rock and its location and each plant, they have a frequency. So vibrational healing or vibrational or subquantum or quantum healing basically works by healing the vibrational frequencies and vibrational templates of that system. With working with the geometry in this way, I'm doing the same thing to bring greater balance to the energetic blueprint of that space or architecture.
One question, because now, like, a lot of radiation that you mentioned is coming from nature, from the Earth, going upwards. But there's of course a lot of man-made radiation as well, and then there's radiation from the cosmos or from outside Earth towards us. Do those affect each other as well? What is the most? Because I thought Celine's question was interesting. That if you talk about the city, there's of course much more radiation, much more activity that might affect the human body. Which one would be the first one to tackle? Is that still kind of what's coming from below us? Is that the strongest, or would it be more like man-made, like Wi-Fi, other electromagnetic fields?
Yeah, they're all important. They're all important, and they can interact as well. If there's a bad situation in the land, and then there's a very bad situation with the electromagnetic, they can interact and make the situation worse. Yeah, so they're all important. So to try and minimize the electromagnetic loads from external sources is very important, and there are different ways of doing that. There are physical ways of doing that with shielding, but they're not pretty, and they're not viable for commercial properties. They're okay if something for someone's home, they're maybe not necessary as well. There are different ways to shield using proprietary products, and I'm testing some at the moment. There are different ways. There are different ways you can transmute it. There is one system that allows you to transmute the negative part of the EM frequency. Essentially, the EM is sometimes not always the worst. It's the subtle component that comes with it, and this is the bit that can impact our biology. And this is the real problem with electromagnetic frequencies, is that they're such short wavelengths that they can impact the cell structures and DNA. So this is really important to be able to, I think, to be able to put this into commercial properties, but also we have to make them look beautiful and not to detriment to the design. One of the really big things in terms of one of the core principles, if we want to build in a true biological way, if we want to build spaces which are about life, is that metal is a very big problem. Because what happens, I think you mentioned the Faraday cage before. Now, a Faraday cage will block frequencies, but you can shield from that when you're doing experiments. But the problem is that if you have a steel frame building, that, or if you have a lot of steel or aluminium in that
it
building,
might also trap the radiation, like you mean mobile phones, etc.
Yeah, exactly. There's another thing as well. Those radiations get trapped in like a cage. So there's a lot of Wi-Fi fields, a lot of LED light sources, a lot of blue light, and also a lot of electricity itself. And there can be electricity that hasn't been grounded, that dirty electricity, where basically amounts of electricity can actually leak from the circuitry. You then got a very high load inside the space. If you do then have any metal in a building, especially if you've got a metal structure and a grid, it's going to hold that in. But also that grid does a second job, which is to stop those life-giving frequencies from nature getting in as well. So it's doubly bad. This is when you get a sick building syndrome, and essentially it's because of the frequencies, and then you can add to that off-gassing from materials, and then you can add to that the geopathic stress, and then that's when people, especially in offices, are starting to get sick because of all the bad stuff's kept inside. And the good stuff, that's not necessarily sunlight or air. We want to obviously naturally ventilate, and that natural lighting, which is so important. But there's also the subtle component. If that metal grid's there, it's also going to stop all of the life force from nature coming in. This is why biophilic research and biophilic design is so important, because it shows how trees can actually give off terpenes, can actually give off sense and micro vibrational qualities that actually can, you spend some time in a forest, you're actually going to see the hunter killer cells are going to increase, and your cancer cells are going to drop down by being in nature. A metal grid is going to, even if you've got a beautiful campus building or a hotel with the metal grid and you've got trees around it, it will start to impact that. So when we can start to use natural materials as much as possible, we're going to allow nature in.
Being the lawyer of the devil, a lot of people will also say, I don't believe this. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that there's an awful lot of studies in terms of sick building syndrome to show that. Yeah. And also there's in terms of my work, in terms of looking at the way that ancient building techniques were built, if you look at natural building techniques, we're using timber frame structures and you're using rammed earth and those things, the electrical component can, I have a device where you can actually measure some of the fields. You can then measure the electrical component within the buildings. Where the buildings, which is a natural.
But can you isolate it that it's like, because of course, like natural material like wood or rammed earth, it's good for many reasons. It's able to absorb humidity, release humidity, stabilize the moisture content, etc. So there's like, can you separate it that it's due to the electromagnetic field or due to some other properties that these materials have?
Yeah, you can. If you're building it in that way, and then you have a space where you're not having Wi-Fi fields, you can then measure that in terms of the beneficial fields, but also then in terms of people's health. It's what's the result? How are people feeling? Especially electrosensitive people who I worked with quite a lot. They have to leave the city because the load for those frequencies are just too much for them. We try and then sort of implement things that are going to help them to be able to just get on the days. And the thing is, unfortunately, it's more than just the electromagnetics. It's also there are much higher frequencies. Sam, you mentioned, or maybe you mentioned it also, like gamma frequencies. We have all these different levels coming in now that have to be recognized. And I think that there's an awful lot of very high frequency things flying around as well, which are not really recognized.
Like I'm teaching at the university here as well, and actually a few years back we worked on a project on a theater for electromagnetic high sensitivity, Basically, there the solution was a wooden building that had copper mesh in the cladding, but it would also mean that all the wiring, etc., for speakers, electricity was all placed outside of it, and people would have to leave their mobile phone when entering. So basically, that there's no internal radiation. Because a mobile phone is actually looking for signal. So if you block it, it's starting to push harder and harder and harder.
Yeah.
It wasn't built, but anyway, that was kind of because the theaters apparently there's a lot of electromagnetic fields because of the amplification and all the systems that go around there. But that's kind of the first time I got in contact with that. Yeah, and they have real symptoms and not able to go to the theater. So this was kind of one way to try to mitigate that.
So just going back to you talking about in terms of the materials, there was an amazing researcher called Professor Philip Callahan who lived in Ireland in the 1950s, and he'd worked on radio on a secret radar installation in Ireland for the Americans and the British in the war. And he had a amazing story. He became a professor of insects, and he came back to Ireland and then started looking at. In Ireland there were these towers, and they're about 30, 40 meters high. There's about 60 of them. And he looked at these towers, and wherever the towers were, there was incredible vitality in the soil. And he applied his understanding of antennas and natural systems and his technical training in the war with radio waves. And he worked out that these antennas were attracting particular frequencies of sunlight into the stone, which are then sending them out into the earth. And then he went around Ireland and looked at traditional houses where they were made with the local stone and timber. And then he recognized that these it's called magnetism, paramagnetism. And these paramagnetic materials, where the people lived in these natural, their natural buildings, they recognized that they were absorbing the materials of the houses were absorbing the particular waves from the sun, and they lived in incredibly simple ways, and were living to incredible ages with the most simple lifestyles and food. And he attributed it to the waves that were absorbed by their homes, and also because the land. And even Ireland has incredibly rich soils. The soils and paramagnetism is relates. So if you go to any volcanic locations, the black rich soils, this paramagnetism, which essentially is the way that the soil stores the subtle energy, the prana in the soil. You have remarkable growth and fertility. And in Ireland, I was there last week. Everything's green. Everything just grows. It's incredible. I mean, they have a temperate climate. They have a lot of rainfall, but the soils are incredibly high quality, and you recognise that. So the ecosystem can provide those answers to us. Yeah, it's quite amazing work.
Can I just jump in with something?
Hi, Sheila. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just at the Integrative and Personalized Medicine Conference, and there was somebody doing a talk on the power of nature for healing. And there are actually studies out there that show that the amygdala can shrink and the frontal cortex and various other parts of the brain can expand. And they've used functional, they call them fMRI, which is it's a type of functional quantifiable MRI for the brain. And they've actually got the documentation around that. So there's some super work coming out in that space if we just keep our ear to it.
What was the cause of the effect?
Just being in nature.
Yeah.
So just the natural environment as opposed to the built environment that's bombarded with.
Yeah, I guess it's nature's really good, but also the cities can be really bad for us, and those vibrations are not there. You come out of the cities, and then that light. It can also be like I've just moved location, and we moved away from the motorway. You can't hear it, but the vibration can be felt. Those vibrations are not there, and so in natural environments, all those natural structures and the natural relationships between all the plants are still in place. This urban environments and all the vibrations from traffic and all that layers of noise, even there can be infra noise, beyond our hearing, can impact living systems. It's another one of the reasons why we're not as relaxed obviously in cities where in nature those constant vibrations are not there.
Like putting that
Mark, I have
issue.
Rosalind.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks. Mark, I have a bit of a different question. My background is in development and investment, so quite boringly, but it's about maximizing profitability for whoever invests. And I particularly come from a company before where it was all about maximizing profitability per square meter. So really creating rooms, module rooms where everything was, there was the point was maximizing the use of space. I'm wondering what you are describing is, I do have the feeling it does have an impact on the maximization of the use of the space, and therefore on profits. Is this something that you're challenged with by your clients? Do these techniques or effectively affecting profitability of an investment, either in terms of being more expensive and or doing less with the space you've got?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, to be able to build, if you're not, we talked about metal, if you're not going to do a metal frame building, then you're going to have to go to more expensive ways. So that can be challenging in terms of those processes. And then we'll have to come up with a solution. If there is a building, sometimes they work with existing buildings and they can apply solutions around them. But yeah, from the commencement, the materials is one. The materials is one thing. I've had this is an example here. This is I'm doing a project on the land in the United Kingdom, and it's for a place where there is a retreat center, and we wanted to be able to bring the vitality up of the land. So essentially, it's like applying a acupuncture solution to all of the land, and to be able to increase the vitality so that the horses there are going to be healthier, and also then the clientele are going to get a greater result from the healing. But we can't. But we can't. The horses are very sensitive, and they're there. It's part of the equine healing modalities. And the land, the owner wanted to be very, very conscientious in the landscape. While I was working with the landscape architect, we couldn't put materials in the land that would change the pH quality of the land. So, and this is Roman cement. So this is basically the cement that was used by the Romans, and the land is also very wet. So the environmental conditions were that if we put anything that wasn't cement in there, it would rot, and the normal cement basically wasn't acceptable for the environmental issues. This is Roman cement. This is 3 ingredients. This is a shale from Spain combined with a sharp sand and water, and it gets harder and harder. And the archaeologists have found that they've found this cement in Roman constructions underwater, and it gets harder over time. So this was one solution that we found in terms of the materiality. So that's quite challenging. But in terms of space design, essentially my geometry can be, to be able to create waveforms, you can then apply them in a single space. But let's say it was a multi hotel, it will be usually applied to into the master planning. They can be then applied at smaller scales, and they can impact. So if you have a repetition of these waveforms, you're then going to have a repetition, for example, in the same way that you would have a solution in the body. A multiplication of those solutions is going to impact the vibrational quality of the space at the small and large scales. People are going to feel that it's more connected. So the more connected is just more easeful. So it's not imbalance. So yeah, it's something that can be used at all scales, and that yeah, in terms of budget, there can be problems, but this is one example of working around it, where the quality of the environment, where the land or the building, we have to look at as well as the vibrational qualities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
To continue on Maria Pia's questions, like how do you convince investors and developers to look into that? Like we're already having difficulties to have them look into sustainability and make the building sustainable, and then make the building healthy and use like a healthy material. So I guess this is also an extra layer, or actually maybe even the first layer before looking into sustain, like, because it's kind of putting everything together. But right now, I guess there's no one who really have all these pieces together. You have to hire like 3 different people for each of the topic, and then like it can be a bit conflicting, although sometimes like the sustainable, like just the sustainable and wellness sometimes can be conflicting, like to make the building more sustainable. Taking an extreme case, you would like have less windows, because then you can save more energy because you have less window, but for people you need more windows so you can have more natural daylight. And then you adding now also the energetic aspect to it. So how, when you talk to owners and developers, do you like justify or like really like encourage them to add this layer because it's gonna be important for their guest health? And also, how do you help them market it in a way, like what's the added value that they can get from it, that they can share to their guests, and how can they share it? Like I guess also like lots of your clients are people who are already attuned to that, or like really sensitive to, like conscious about holistic healing, energy, spirituality, etc. But how can you make it also more mainstream?
Yeah, exactly. So the ones who are tuned to it, some can actually feel it in terms of simply applying the work. So it's not going to be a massive, huge additional cost. There's one way is to be able to work within the footprint. Essentially, it's just adjusting the structural design, and there's no additional. I don't need to add any materials in. There's no additional material cost. It's based on the layout of the structure. The geometry will do that. So if I'm able to come in at an early stage, then there's no additional cost to the build cost. It's just it's inherent within the structure. There's also simple ways to do it externally. If the building's been created, I can build a grid outside of the building at a macro scale. So they can be very cost-effective ways to create these effects without impacting the build cost. In terms of your last question, Celine, in terms of the education really to developers, then really, yeah, that does take some time, because essentially I have to utilize the technology I have. So I use a technology called the BioWell device, which is the industry standard for most vibrational practitioners in the world, which is a Russian technology which is able to take a map of the human biofield, and then we're able to then do measurements. We did a sleep study where we used the shell, for example, to then just place the shells around the bed, and then we were able to map all the body's energy systems. So essentially, the organ systems, the vitality are then mapped. So the impact can be seen. So we can, and really people do want to see that. That's why I use that system. It's pretty much the best way to show how vitality and health can be impacted by those changes, whether it's if we're going to do a room design, we have to then remove the beds if that's possible. If it's not, then there are things that can be put in place to be able to impact the land. That could be working directly on the land. Those things can be mapped and seen, and so people do need to see that. And it can be a challenge, you know, for some developers if they aren't in that mind space. And then I think the last part of your question then is what's in terms of the added value. Essentially, what it means is that when I'm talking to potential clients, is to say we can then go to the next level in terms of recognizing how wellness properties and destinations can then actually can really recognize the landscape, can really recognize what's there, to really recognize that there's another level to go to beyond the materiality or the air conditioning or natural ventilation of those systems, that we can then work to put in place things that are going to impact life at another level, at a really holistic level. And you know, I have to work on that, because not everyone recognizes that, because it is something that has to be felt or to be seen.
I have a question.
Yes.
With a tendency or trend, if you want to call it that I'm seeing for buildings being built underground or green roofs or things like that, how does that impact the either trapping of energy or embeddedness within an environment?
There's lots of layers to that. I think without having to make a pun, I think that there's, like, for example, if you have a greenhouse or a polytunnel and you drop it 6 feet down, you can grow tomatoes in Alaska. So there are very great benefits to life in that way. If you're going to go underground, there are, in terms of the energetics, it also depends on the location. You can go down. There's a very deep part to the knowledge of my tradition, which understands that when you go to certain heights, if you get exactly the right height, the height off the ground, and if you match that height to the waveform of the place, which is like a harmonic of the land, you could then create particular effects. And these were used in temple building. They will then apply heights within that to have particular qualities. So you could build and place a bedroom at a certain height, and that could then have a negative impact because of the levels. And these are quite subtle things. In terms of vitality, I mean, you can go down and you can go up, but I think it needs to be measured though. I think it's on a case by case. It depends on the geology and also the latitude. And the way I work, it's the combination of the physicality and also the information that's caused. And remember, you weren't there at the beginning. I was relating how I work to a geometry that's equivalent to like a horoscope of the place. And these are sort of it's information caused by more macro sets of information that's going to impact us, that are really very subtle, but over time can impact wellness.
Because I think this, like, if people would like to dive deeper in this, like, because of course there's a lot of aspects to it, like radon is coming from the soil, radiation, of course, from man-made waves, but then like earth, and like if we dig deep, for example, materials also from that needs excavation typically have more radiation than others. But where to start if people want to read about it, for example, or like, do you have any documentation or books that you would recommend, or
Even just to know what questions to ask.
yeah?
I mean,
Except from call you.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There are some resources. I mean, there's a lot of really good resources in terms of biofitting. If you know, biofitting design has become very big, especially on Instagram, and it tends to be a lot of that can be about plant. But there is there's a really fantastic body of research literature, and I think that there's a lot of really good studies going back 30 years or so in terms of understanding the impact of natural systems upon urban environments. There's a lot there, and I've looked at a lot of that. In terms of the electromagnetics, there's a huge amount. There's a vast amount of industry research that's there in terms of knowing that ionizing radiation has the impact upon life. Unfortunately, the telecom industries don't want that information to come out, and so a lot of that then becomes put down, and that they create their own studies. So in terms of EMFs, there's a huge amount of information. There's probably the best book for EMFs is a book called The Invisible Rainbow by Feinstein, I think. That's the standard text of understanding the impact upon those frequencies. In terms of the geopathic stress, the best place to start would be the understanding buildings as a biological system. The best place would be the work of the Building Biology Institute in Germany. They essentially are working with understanding how a building as a biological system can impact health, and a lot of their work has been now starting to be recognized in the last decade or so. But I mean, in Germany and France in particular, they have decades and decades of research and understanding. Switzerland as well with this. So I think Germany's Ball Biology, BAU Biology. You know, so they don't quite go as far as I do in terms of the harmonics and psychogeometry, but they really do understand that a building can create these waveforms. I guess another core research would be in terms of there's a new body of work which really is probably the fastest in terms of a public group of amount of awareness. It's a system called biogeometry. It's a little bit aligned with my work. It's a newer system, and it's created by an architect and a scientist. His name is Dr. Ibrahim Karim. And Dr. Karim's work is really fantastic. He's basically looked at waveforms that came, and the science of waveforms from the Egyptian tradition. And essentially the Egyptian temple priests recognized these waveforms and used it in the design of the pyramids and all their structures. This information then came down through the Jesuits discovered the information, and then in the 1930s there were a lot of physicians were using dowsing techniques to measure the human biofield. Then it went away. Dr. Karim's work has come to prominence because he has used this understanding, the way that shapes can create waveforms in the same way. And this is huge science at a subtle vibrational level. If you have this is an internal room. That the waveform given off from the inside angle, the outside angle, is very different. So if you have a shape like this, the Chinese systems, they call it a secret arrow. From the apex of that point, it gives off a waveform. And many of these waveforms are very subtle, but where we have external angles, all of these points can then create these waves. Hence why you see a lot of biological architecture, and that the forms where there's curved forms, it's a softer space, and then it can impact the energetics of the space. Dr. Karim's work, he was able to prove it, where he looked specifically at his waveforms, and he was asked by it was a town in Switzerland, and they were in a particular topographical situation. I think it was a valley with hills around, and a telecoms company came along and put a tower on top of the hill. Once they put the tower on top of the hill, the frequencies were basically trapped, I think, by the range. All the people in the town had to sleep in their basements, and all the birds left the valley. So he came along with his system, and he said, okay, I'd like to solve this problem, these frequencies. And the telecom company said, that's okay, you can do that, do whatever you want, but you can't physically touch our towers. And then he basically utilized he installed some of his antennas. I've got one here. It's a series of geometries. I can show it to you in a moment. He directed them at the mast. He transformed the subtle frequencies that were causing the problems, and then the birds came back. People came out of their houses, but the tower still worked. So he has a very big body of knowledge, and it's been corroborated because the Egyptian government as well. He was able to use the same geometries to be able to work on at cellular level. So he was in labs. He uses geometry to slow down or to speed up cells. So essentially, what we're looking at here is, with all of this, is a very ancient science which understood the way that form is able to impact biology.
It's very interesting because this is something that we've seen in different places across the world, you know, the way the Mayan built their temples and the Egyptians and the pyramids. And but it seems that today what remains to the surface of knowledge is in Asia, and that's where they managed to keep this knowledge. Whereas in Europe, it's something that went a bit under the radar and is emerging again. So, yeah, it's interesting to see like all of this science coming back to the surface and being used.
There's a very interesting book by two researchers who went to, you say, the Mayans, Jolin. Two researchers went to South America, and they were looking at seed germination, and they took their magnometers and their counters, and they went up to the top of the Mayan pyramids. The Mayan pyramids are flat, not like this. They went up to the top, and they placed their seeds there, and then they were able to recognize, they were able to look at the seed growth, and then they were able to recognize that the architecture. The pyramids create particular waveforms. They located them on particular vortexes and magnetic anomalies. The seeds then grew at an incredible rate. They then went back and looked at the records, and they were able to look at those particular civilizations that had the technology to build in those ways. The ones that had the pyramids, they correlated with the civilizations that lasted the longest. So they were basically recognizing that the architecture were rather than just being ritual spaces, were being used to be able to enhance the seeds, hence agriculture and the health of the people. And yeah, so that's a really fascinating book, which really has that link between the architecture and the biology and the environment and the waveforms as well. Well, they don't go so much into the geometry of it.
What's the name of the book?
That is, let me tell you. I've not looked at it for a while. It's called Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, Understanding the Lost Technology of the Ancient Megalith Builders. Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. And so so essentially, and I've not really gone into this today, the very ancient roots of my work goes back into the Celtic tradition, where building structures were placed to enhance the fertility of the soil and to make structures that would enhance life. And all of that began with the location and the materials they're using. They were using stone because it was the most long lasting. But if you have a granite, for example, with a very high quartz silica content, there's the stone gets compressed, especially if it's stood upright. It creates something called the piezoelectric effect. That stone then creates a charge. You create more electric charge, and you create greater life. So so they were very smart. They knew what they were doing. I think they were making structures, big crystalline structures.
It's very fascinating, Mark. I just want to say that I really appreciate what you have been talking about, and I have to get my act together and start to read a little bit more what you're doing. So, and we have to continue with our discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. Like that's a very interesting field, and also thinking a bit outside the box, but at the same time, it's not really outside the box. Is digging the old boxes and and making them like used again. You know, so that's very fascinating. Thank you.
Forgotten
Thanks.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is. It's using the old boxes, and actually it's really, I find it incredibly fascinating because all of that knowledge was almost lost in terms of, we have the old farming ways, the old agricultural ways, but in terms of the old building ways, and especially with the materials and the sunlight and paramagnetism, all these things, there was a vast store of knowledge that was utilized. And now with our building incentives, to budget and time and speed and likeness, all these things, we've a lot of those principles are lost. And I think if we can bring those in and really start to think about or about health and the wellness in those ways, we can still create what we want, but we can gain, we can get greater wellness in our buildings. So it does take a little bit of time for people to recognize those principles. And yes, absolutely, to be able to recognize that the budget might have to be, it might, sometimes to achieve those goals, then they have to be built into the budget, and that can be a problem. Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much, everyone, and yeah, we'll see you next month for. I'm just checking next call is on the 15th of July, and the topic will be recycle, reuse, and reduce. How do I do that in a hotel? So another exciting conversation ahead. Wishing you a wonderful month, and thank you so much, and see you next time, guys.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you. Lovely to see
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.